The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
I plan to support the pause, but I will keep an open mind.
We think that's an extremely reasonable offer, and we're absolutely baffled that you do not see the wisdom in that.
It's so frustrating because it just seems no amount of reason or effort or anything is going to help this project continue.
And I just think I need an independent analysis of what are the true costs. And I really just feel like I can't make a decision without those facts.
If anyone ever needed proof that elections have consequences, all they have to do is watch Cincinnati City Council this week. A new mayor and 3 new council members determined to implement their campaign promises to kill the streetcar has left the council, city, and regional residents deeply divided. Most importantly, this week has convinced many that the energy of the last decade was an illusion and that, in fact, the region's culture is out of step with mainstream American urban life and fundamentally risk-averse, leaving little reason for talented young professionals to either come or stay here. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. After a tough election, most new administrations begin their terms with calls for collaboration and unity. Those niceties were dispensed with weeks ago, long before the new mayor and council members were sworn in last Sunday. Where do we stand a week later? To discuss that, I'm joined this morning by David Mann, the vice mayor and chair of the committee to review the status of the streetcar project, and council member P.G. Sittenfeld, who had long been critical of the streetcar project, but has decided that at this point we should press forward. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
After a week, David, in sum, where do you think we are?
Well, we have paused the project, and we are about to engage consultants who, on a very quick time frame, will take a look independently and objectively at the cost, comparative cost of going forward, of stopping, and then the information will come back to council. And there are 2 of us at least that are going to look at that very critically, and that will influence what our position is, that being Kevin Flynn and myself. And I have said that the cost of continuing and the cost of termination are close. I'm for continuation.
Okay. PG, where do you think we are?
Well, Dan, let me first say it's a pleasure to be here with Vice Mayor Mann, who I consider both a friend, a mentor, and I'm honored to get to be a colleague of his now. Look, as you mentioned in the introduction, I have been critical of this project in the past, so if people want someone who has been some rah-rah cheerleader for the project, I'm not their guy. I've based my decision on dollars and cents, and are we going to waste tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money and have nothing to show for it, or are we going to get some return on the investment? So I think, given where the project is, not where I led it, but the reality that we are now grounded in, I think better to avoid the waste of millions of dollars, avoid the loss of hundreds of jobs, avoid doing damage to our national image as well as our reputation with the federal government.
But have we already done that by getting to this point?
It's not too late. No, look, I've put forward a plan. My concern has always been the long-term annual operating expenses. So I've put forward a plan to take those expenses off the table. I was with one of the vice presidents of one of the biggest foundations in town last night. They said, we will sponsor the studies, the plans to help make sure those expenses get taken off the table. I know it can happen. So at this point, on the capital side and the construction side, we're going to have a streetcar we're not for somewhere in the same range of money from all the homework I've done.
But David, last week at one point, the Hale Foundation offered to provide a certain amount of money, $35,000 a day, to keep things going for a 10-day period to do this review. And council turned that down. In fact, that's what Wendell Young was reacting to and saying, mystified why that wasn't accepted. Why wasn't that accepted? That would have seemed to me, bringing private money into any city project normally would have gotten cheered. Why was that rejected, and does that just tell us that this is just sort of a sham exercise?
It's not a sham. We had 3 long days of hearings, 3 separate council meetings, and literally moments before the last council meeting began, a motion is presented that contains reference to pledges to pay. Nothing in writing that is enforceable. I talked quickly to the vice president of the foundation, the Hale Foundation, and there were strings. Number one, we could not pause. Number two, the scope of the study was subject to approval by the foundation. Number three, there was a cap on how much money would be available. It felt to me like it was a ploy to make us continue to spend $100,000 a day by continuing construction instead of making a decision to pause and having an objective review, which is what we're on the timetable to do now.
Let's take a look at this audit itself.
Sure.
First off, everybody says this has to be quick. We want to get this done. Who's going to do the audit?
The city manager, acting city manager, Scott Stiles, is in the process of lining up a team. As I understand it, it'll be an independent major accounting firm, an engineering firm, some folks within the city that have familiarity with public budgeting. And before the team begins working, its scope will be defined through a process that will involve each member of council having input.
And Dan, I certainly respect Vice Mayor Mann for saying he wants more information to feel comfortable with his ultimate decision. On my end, I feel like I tried to do my due diligence, talking to business experts, legal experts, streetcar supporters, opponents, in town, out of town. As far as this audit now goes, it needs to be three things. It needs to be done quickly, it needs to be done thoroughly, and most of all, it needs to be done fairly. Obviously, it is going to be under enormous scrutiny, and if people feel like in any way the process itself are not fair, it's going to create more problems than it resolves.
What will indicate fairness to you?
I think numbers that can be justified, where you can point to a balance sheet and say, you know, here is this broken down cost. Here is what a closeout cost would be going forward. I mean, you know, that to me...
Are we only talking about construction numbers here? Is that all we're going to be talking about in this audit? Or are we talking about, you know, the, well, on an immediate level, will this audit take into account the cost of defending against lawsuits that will certainly come from business owners who...
I think the audit certainly needs to be comprehensive. I mean, that was what the thorough part means. This needs to include, you know, sort of every possible expense that is more likely to incur. But another thing, don't simplify the construction things. As I was sitting down with John Dietrich, who, as we all know, oversaw the banks, oversaw Fort Washington Way,
right,
you realize the complexity of a project like this, the contractors that have subs and sub-subs, where, you know, long ago, contracts were signed for someone to come up with a, you know, a power generator that someone is already starting to put the pieces together, and they have subcontracts for that. This is very not tidy to try and unwind, which is one of the things I realized, which is why it will be a huge expense to try and, you know, scrap the project now.
What's in the audit, what's out? I mean, what kinds of things
The
really
test for me is a comparison of the cost to terminate and the cost to complete. Now, there are the operating costs. PG has put forth a proposal that's very attractive. Now, it's not locked down at this moment.
Sure.
Part of it requires a vote of a geographic area,
right,
and that vote won't take place for many, many months. And if we continue construction on the assumption that that vote will be positive, that may or may not happen. But it's true that any transportation system these days does have some continuing operating subsidies. So there's a limit to how much that should influence the final decision. Another factor is the reality that this is, if we go forward, phase one of a transportation system. Phase two would link the downtown with UC, and in fact, if that's what we were talking about, and if the federal money hadn't been blocked by the governor, we would be having quite a different conversation. But one of the things that some want to take into account are the cost of phase two. For me, at this point, the question is, as I've said, the difference between the cost to complete phase one versus the cost to terminate. And if they're close, I will support continuation.
Mm-hmm. How quickly do you think, you said Scott Stiles, the acting city manager, will identify the accounting firm. Is that done by competitive bid?
No,
no. You don't have to do that?
I think the choice has been made. I've heard the name of an accounting firm, but I haven't, you know, I'm waiting for acting city manager Stiles to lay out his team and a timetable. It will be very quick. It has to be very quick. There are all sorts of reasons why this decision needs to be made quickly. Because if it's not, the costs continue to go up. In fairness to this community, we can't have this hanging over us for months.
Is this, in fact, saying that people just don't believe John Dietrich, who has done all of those other things, not only in this city, but other cities, has a national reputation?
Dan, because again, I come at this as, frankly, a streetcar skeptic, but my decision has been less about streetcars and more about what I think is responsible financial stewardship, not wasting tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer money. So John Dietrich was actually relatively new to this project just in the last handful of months. He comes with impeccable credentials, but not only did I sit down and take his numbers that they offered, I approached those with a high degree of skepticism. So I then went to business leaders, to major developers, to people that have been involved in transportation projects and said, are the numbers that we're being offered in an appropriate range? Based on other experiences you've had, do these seem appropriate? That's where I got my numbers. And no matter whose analysis you believe, we are well past the 50% mark, would be with the closeout costs, well past the 50% mark for the local budget of this project.
So the point here is, the question is, are you saying that after you talked to all of those people, you actually thought John Dietrich's numbers were basically sound? Or are you saying...
what I said was I took numbers from somebody who's widely respected and does have expertise, and then with a degree of skepticism, I went to other people who have expertise.
So where did you come out at the end of that?
That it would cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 million. I mean, that's not an exact number to cancel this project. So let's have some return on the investment rather than the waste.
Okay. So what we're doing is trying to find out if that guarantees, if those can be confirmed by this independent audit.
And don't forget, when Mr. Dietrich made his presentation to the previous council at a meeting to which I was invited, but I wasn't permitted to ask any questions or participate in any way, there was a tremendous range between something like $8 million on the one hand in additional expenditures or $40 million in additional expenditures. That's a tremendous range. It doesn't give you confidence that we have a true understanding of what the cost is. That's what we're trying to understand.
And Dan, can I clarify one other point? Because I really respect, I mean, in addition to respecting David as a person, I respect him wanting to have, you know, solid, firm, independently generated numbers in front of him. The other reason why I made the decision I made of saying, you know, I think we should go forward with this right now, given where the project is. We were told by the chief counsel for the FTA that pause equals cancel. If that turns out not to be true, then that's great. But I have to operate under the intelligence I'm given, especially when it's coming from, you know, a high-level appointee in a major government agency.
What do you think about that?
You know, the last word in how a brief pause will be treated is not with a lawyer who's on a conference call with a council committee that is totally committed to the project, the old council. He has bosses. The policymakers will make that judgment. I'm totally confident that a brief pause doesn't jeopardize the federal money. That's not going to happen to a city like Cincinnati, in a county like Hamilton County, in a state as important to Ohio, in a Democratic administration. It will not happen.
And look, you know, David obviously has served our country in Congress as well. I just want to follow up on his comment by saying I certainly hope he's right.
Okay. One of the aspects of this process this past week has been to make these emergency measures.
Well, they weren't. It turned out the emergency clauses were not adopted.
They weren't adopted in the end. So does that mean that the referendum option is still on the table?
My understanding is because they involve the appropriation of money, that they take effect immediately and they're not subject to referendum.
And Dan, this is something I actually feel pretty strongly about because I joined with other people on the parking situation. I opposed the parking and I thought, you know, if citizens want to take this into their own hands by having a referendum, they should have that right. Other people who are involved in that process referred to the sacred right of referendum. The reason those allocations were connected to the legislation was so that these are referendum proof. And I understand that was so that money would stop being spent. I respect that. I understand that. But if the right of referendum is sacred, rights don't go away. Rights are rights. So, you know, whether I agree with people or not, you don't take that right away from them suddenly, and,
so
it has been.
Where do you think we are on this?
Well, as Vice Mayor Mann said, because an allocation was attached to the ordinances, they are not able to be referendum.
So, but that's all dealing with the pause, right? So is when we come back to the other end of this review, and if there's a vote to shut down, there will be money involved with that, too. There will be appropriations that have to be tied to that. So it will not be eligible for referendum, so that will be the end of it?
I don't know that we know the answer to that question. I'm not sure exactly what the content of the additional ordinances that would be necessary would be. Would they all involve money? And there is a separate initiative led by Councilmember Simpson to prepare a charter amendment for the May ballot. And I think a majority of council probably would support it, depending on the language, which would permit once more, well, actually for the first time, a straight up or down vote, pro-streetcar, not pro-streetcar. It would not be the convoluted language we had before where the charter amendment was, shall a streetcar be prohibited,
right,
which confused everybody.
Right, the two times that it was on the ballot.
Right.
So at this point then, there is still the option that even if this got paused for a longer period of time through May, then there would be possibility of a different situation.
Although the one thing I would add is, you know, what matters at the end of the day is not just what do you want to do, how do you pay for it? And the truth is, if the money has fallen apart by then, if the federal government thinks that we've defaulted on our agreement and they've pulled that money, the whole project unravels. So it doesn't do a whole lot of good to pass a charter amendment saying you must build a streetcar if we no longer have the money, if we've wasted hundreds of millions of dollars. And Dan, I'm going to keep coming back to that. For me, as someone who never has loved this, you know, streetcar project from the get-go, this is about, are we going to waste huge sums of money, or are we going to get something back for it?
But I think the question, with all respect to my colleague, my dear colleague,
everybody likes everybody here. Yeah, go ahead.
This is true. Well, this is true. But if you don't love the streetcar project, you might be suspect whether it's going to be successful or not. And that has to be taken into account in deciding whether to keep spending money. The fact that you spent $50 doesn't mean that you should spend $100 if it's something that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Can I come back to that for 1 second? Dan, if 6 years ago you had said, PG, we've got $150 million for you, how do you want to spend it? I probably would have chosen some other avenues. I really would have. I've been very blunt about that. The truth is, where we are today, tens of millions of dollars out the door. So are we going to have something to show for that money or not? And I do believe where we are now, there's some return on the investment to be had.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens in the next 10 days to 2 weeks, and I got a feeling you guys will be back. So, thank you very much. Stay tuned. After the break, we switch gears. Regional transportation project, the Eastern Corridor. Another chance to weigh in on the Oasis rail component at public meetings this coming week. Is that ironic? The rail line on the eastern edge of downtown is silent, but heads east. For years now, the Oasis line has promised traffic relief to those who navigate traffic every day in the Eastern Corridor. This week, the Ohio Department of Transportation is hosting 3 meetings inviting comment about plans to develop the Oasis rail transit and the region's first commuter rail line. Welcome back. The Eastern Corridor program is a massive regional effort using multimodal approach of improved roadway networks combined with new rail transit options, bikeways, walking paths to link Cincinnati's core to the eastern communities and those communities to each other. One element of that total program is the Oasis Rail Transit Project. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the Ohio Department of Transportation is hosting 3 meetings to solicit input from the public, and we'll give you more information about those as we go along. To discuss the Oasis Rail and upcoming public meetings, I'm joined now by Hamilton County Commissioner Todd Portune, who heads the Hamilton County Transportation Improvement District. Todd, welcome back.
Dan, thank you very much.
Eastern Corridor is something you've been on here several times to talk about.
We have, and as you know, it's a multimodal program affecting 2 counties and 17 political jurisdictions from Cincinnati out to Claremont County, including passenger commuter rail from downtown to Eastgate or Milford.
Todd, is there a certain irony that these meetings are going to be held this coming week, given what happened at City Hall this past week on the streetcar and the first part of this show this morning about the streetcar? What's the linkage here? We're trying desperately to kill one rail project, and now here this is this other rail project.
Well, it's coincidental, first of all, that these are all taking place at the same time. But to tell you the truth, the Eastern Corridor Oasis Rail Project and the streetcar should have been a collaborative effort for a number of years, and honestly, efforts to do that were rebuffed some time ago, and people that were supporting the streetcar at the city of Cincinnati actually killed an opportunity for the Eastern Corridor to realize almost $50 million in federal funding because they viewed it all as being competitive as opposed to being collaborative. The Oasis Rail program is actually where this region is going to see passenger rail introduced for the first time, where we're actually moving people between communities in a commuter basis, where folks from the urban core will be able to get to where jobs are being created and opening up new areas for economic development, and also where people who live in the suburbs and the exurbs are going to be able to get into downtown, the banks, the stadiums, the downtown core, which is the major economic engine of the region.
The planning effort for this has been going on for some time. Where do we really stand on some sort of continuum between concept and actually doing something?
We're over halfway done. And that's really the good news. The Tier 1 process is concluded. We're now in Tier 2. Tier 2 is all about refining the original conceptual ideas that have been approved within the communities that stretch from downtown out to Claremont County. And now we're honing in on the specifics. So the public hearings that we're going to have coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday are all about the stations along the Oasis line. Where is the best location for stations to be constructed so that they can not only accommodate the traffic, people getting on and off the rail cars, but where is the best location for them to also serve as catalysts for economic development? Because what the Eastern Corridor is really all about at the end of the day is not just how quickly you can move people from one point to the other, but it's about using transportation improvements as economic development catalysts.
And any major train, whether it's light rail or in this case, this isn't light rail, this is heavy rail.
Well, it's not heavy rail. No, it's not heavy rail at all, Dan. That's a misconception. Is
this light rail?
It is a kind of light rail. It's not electric. It's powered by what are called the engines are DMUs, diesel movable units. They're very sleek, they're modern, they're low emission, they're low noise. Many of them are hybrids with electric power plants as well that run through residential areas on electric batteries. They're not at all the heavy rail, commuter rail that people are accustomed to seeing along the Eastern Seaboard.
Corridor. No. Okay. So one of the factors, as you're saying, is that where you put those stations, that's where you get a lot of development. It's just like putting a new exit on an expressway. Union Center. Right. You put Union Center, and all of a sudden you have all kinds of investment around that. So
that's exactly right.
Is that going to be so you're saying that's the focus of these meetings this week?
Well, it's really twofold. That's one of the areas of focus is going to be what's the best location in certain areas for the stations to be constructed that will create the best opportunity for economic development. There are also different kinds of stations that you can construct. So we're going to get input into what people in individual communities want in their community. So this is very grassroots driven from the ground up, very open and transparent process, so that at the end of the day what we have is a tremendous transportation enhancement for the region, really the first line of a regional passenger rail system tied into downtown and any other transit that may occur downtown, but it's driven from the grassroots up, from the ground up.
Will this end up in that transportation facility underneath the banks?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So people always saying that's not used, that's not used. This would actually use that, right?
This will use that. In fact, that was constructed specifically to accommodate commuter rail coming in on the Oasis line from the east, on the Central Indiana line from the west that goes out to Lawrenceburg. There's the Blue Ash line that goes north-south, can take you up through Sharonville and on into Butler County. We also have high plans and hopes that this will be the first leg that will take us to the airport as well, the transit center, and we've had discussions with Kenton County Airport Board and Director Candace McGraw about that express line. They're very supportive of moving on to next steps as far as that goes.
So it's like anything else, even in the case of the streetcar. You got to start someplace.
You do have to start someplace.
And you can't be every place all at once. So you're saying this is the place that is got by far the most work done on it in terms of this sort of commuter trail.
And it's the other thing about all this, Dan, is this is a very economical way to introduce transit to the region. We're using existing track and right-of-way that's in the ground, saving a tremendous amount of money because of that.
I want to make sure people know about these 3 meetings. If you'd like to learn more, you're invited to attend one of 3 meetings this Tuesday and Wednesday. On Tuesday from 6 till 8, the meeting will be held at the RG Cribbett Center in Fairfax. On Wednesday, there are 2 meetings, one from 10:30 in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon at the Taft Center on Fountain Square in the Weston Complex, and that evening from 6 till 8 at the Miami Township Center in Milford. All will be open house format, so you can come at any time. You don't have to be there at the beginning of the meeting. Todd, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
We'll look to see how this happens, and transportation on both ends of this show. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women working to shape our region for the future. Have a good week.